So
I'll start. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today and welcome to the 130th session of Majlis Khonji. Please allow me to introduce our guest speakers for the session. Dr. Robert Whitcombe, a chartered environmentalist who specializes in environmental planning and biodiversity conservation. He has over 40 years of experience. He first worked in Oman from 1977 to 1980 for the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries on the Al Khabura development project that has been established by Durham University and PDO. After completing his PhD at Durham University, he returned to Oman from 1985 to 1992, working for Planning Committee for Development and Environment in the government of Dhofar, and contributing to the preparation of a regional development plan and sub-regional land use plans for Dhofar. He then worked on African Development Bank projects for 3 years before joining the multidisciplinary consultancy W.S. Atkins in the UK in 1995. At Atkins, and working for government and private sector clients, Dr. Robert has been a key player in the preparation of urban, coastal zone, regional, land use, and conservation area plans in Africa, Europe, Latin America, and Middle East. From 2017 to 2020, when Atkins was the main consulting engineer in the MSc, all 3 speakers, including Dr. Robert, worked on Oman National Spatial Strategy, ONSS, for the Supreme Council for Planning. They prepared national policies and plans and oversee the work of 4 consulting teams preparing regional spatial strategies for the 11 governorates of the Sultanate. Dr. Robert was the environmental and sustainability lead. We have also Mr. John Barber, the director of Atkins and economist. He has worked in Oman since the early 2000s on a range of projects and had the privilege to live in Oman from 2007 to 2011. And most recently, 2016 to 2020, when he was the technical lead and economist for the Oman Spatial National Strategy. And Mr. John Montague is an associate director at Atkins and a chartered planner. He has been addressing urban development concerns in the Middle East and South Asia for 40 years, with over 15 years of experience in Oman, starting from 1983 in Brahmi, with periods also in Muscat and Sohar. He has led numerous strategic planning projects, including the redevelopment of Riyadh Historical Center, climate change strategy for Calcutta, national tourism strategy for Oman, and preparation of the Sultanate first spatial strategy. Welcome all of you to Majlis Khonji, and the floor is yours. Dr. Robert, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Reham, and thanks to His Excellency HighLevel Khonji for giving us the invitation to speak to you all this evening. I hope you can see the screen. Is that good for you, Reham, as representative? So the 3 of us today are going to talk about the Oman National Spatial Strategy, which we've really finished work on, or worked on, from 2017 to 2020. It was sort of three years of very intensive work. And it was sort of finalized in 2021. I'm just going to get the next slide. Sorry, that's not, there we go. It was finalized in 2021. It was a massive piece of work involving collaboration between staff from Atkins and some of their sub-consultants, 4 teams of planners working on Oman's different governorates, of which there are 11, and colleagues from the Supreme Council for Planning and representatives of many other ministries and many stakeholders who contributed in various workshops. So in this presentation, there is no way we can cover the full amount of work that we covered. And we could talk for 5 or 10 minutes on each slide. So we will try and give just an overview of some of the key points relating to urban and rural planning and some of the drivers for the planning that we worked on in the strategy. So the first part will just be an overview of the preparation of the strategy. which I'll give a brief presentation on. Then we will go into 3 of the sector strategies. Simon will talk about delivering strategic development. That's the sort of spatial planning element. John Barber will talk about delivering growth and prosperity. That's the economics. That's the economic input into the spatial strategy. And I'll talk then at the end about the natural and cultural environment, 2 very important components of the strategy as well. There are other sectoral strategies that we worked on during the course of the ONSS, but we don't have time to talk about those tonight in any detail, or not only if you had very specific questions. We also considered very seriously the topics of sustainability, climate change, and planning for the future, or resilience. So these are cross-cutting topics which we built into the various sector strategies rather than treating them as separate. I think all of the sectors need to consider sustainability and climate change and resilience. When we started this in 2017, it was evident there was a need for a new approach to strategic planning in Oman. There had never been a national spatial strategy prepared previously. So we needed to consider what had happened in the country up until that point. There had been 50 years of very rapid developments since the start of the country's renaissance in 1970. There'd been a rapidly growing population, many young Omanis now coming onto the job market, no guiding framework to encourage sustainable urban development in the Sultanate, that land policies needed reconsideration. There had been entitlements, or have been for many years, entitlements to a plot for many Omanis, putting a lot of pressure on the Ministry of Housing and the various utility companies and authorities to provide services to those plots. With rapid population growth, the coordination of development between sectors was maybe not quite as good as it should have been. Each of the ministries and government authorities were busy making their own contributions to the rapid development of the Sultanate, but there was a need for better coordination amongst those. And sometimes there was conflict between economic sectors. Tourism depends on a very healthy natural environment and landscape. Mining depends on the same mountains for its productive resource, and there can be conflicts between mining and tourism, for example, and there needed to be ways of reconciling those. Environmental damage, despite the best efforts of the Ministry of Environment and Climate Affairs at the time, was taking place. Damage to land, mountains along the coast and in urban areas. Water resources were under pressure from overuse of water particularly for agriculture. Saline intrusion was taking place along most of the Bartana coast. Water was being exploited from the Nejd and fossil aquifers at quite a high rate in maybe an unmanaged way. So there were a growing number of planning concerns and challenges, including climate change and utility provision, which needed to be addressed in a coordinated way. So what should happen? How should a strategy go forward for Oman? Well, I think the Vision 2040 was being prepared at a similar time, so there was an interface with that. That set an overall vision for the development of the country. Spatial strategy was going to take that into account and find out a good way of putting it into place in spatial terms. There was a need to involve different sectors and institutions, get better cross-sectoral working and an end to silo working, as we used to call it. And there needs to be improved planning system and planning institutions. The Supreme Council for Planning had been involved in sectoral development and 5-year plan budgets, but there was a need to, I think, strengthen planning capabilities. to develop urban planning policies and standards, and to develop more sophisticated data systems to inform planning decisions. There was also a need to consider a balanced development between the governorates, recognizing the advantages of each, but trying to make sure development was spread in a balanced way across the country. There was a need to protect the country's environmental and cultural and historic assets from inappropriate development. The economy needed to be diversified away from petrochemicals and to encourage investment promotion. That has been a long-standing goal, and progress has been made, but it was recognized that further effort was needed to diversify the economy. Transport needed a fresh look at it, with greater emphasis on public transport and perhaps less emphasis on roads and personal transport, particularly in urban areas. And there's also a need to involve the community and the private sector in the planning process, and to respond to climate change, which was becoming a growing concern. So there was a strategic agenda that was developed, integrating sustainability into all the country's development aspects. This is on the economic side. There was a need to respond to expected population growth, look at a contemporary land use system. I won't go into all of these. Look at smart integrated mobility, reducing reliance on motorized transport. Look at how to preserve and enhance natural areas and cultural heritage, both to preserve them and make them available and accessible to local people and to visitors. Look after the coastal environment. Look at the water resources and make proposals for managing those better. Look at energy transition away from oil and gas as part of addressing climate change, and look at a generally cleaner, healthier environment. So what are the benefits of spatial planning? Well, we can look at this in three ways: economic, social, and environmental. There's economic benefits. If there's a clear spatial plan, which is going to be followed by the country, it provides a vision and stability and confidence for private sector investment. It can help identify suitable locations for economic development. It can make sure that the land being made available for development is well placed in relation to transport and where the future labour force will be working and living. It can promote environmental quality in both urban and rural areas. Again, trying to get the balance right for investment in those areas. And it can identify development that meets the needs of communities, perhaps avoiding mining very close to communities, but for identifying suitable employment opportunities where they exist. And also in some of the urban areas where very rapid developments have taken place and perhaps not gone quite as intended, there's opportunities to promote regeneration and renewal, and to make decisions in a more efficient and consistent way. And this is all beneficial to the economy. Social benefits, this means local communities should benefit from better access to services and local facilities. Vacant land can be used, which can make it better for those people living in nearby areas. You develop better neighborhoods, and you can promote the creation and maintenance of better places to live, with green areas of green space as being developed under planning standards and so on. Environmental benefits, again, it's regenerating and identifying appropriate use of land, making sure that development is in a good place and not near to sensitive environmental areas. One can promote the use of brownfield land, minimizing the development of greenfield land, by understanding the impacts of climate change and flood risk, damage to property and people can be avoided. By looking at urban transport systems, and promoting public transport, air quality can be improved. And in rural areas, there's opportunities to promote and enhance natural and cultural heritage and look for areas of suitable for recreation. And as I've mentioned, looking at modes of transport, again, trying to move away from the private car, particularly in urban areas, for the benefit of people living in those areas and their health. So how was it formulated? We made close reference to Vision 2040, which provided high-level guidance for the country's development over the next 20 years. There's a strong focus on economic development in Vision 2040, which is absolutely essential. Then there's a mention of environment and in recognizing the importance of sustainable use of natural resources in Vision 2040, but maybe the mechanisms for doing that needed to be put in place in more detail. And so this is something which the spatial strategy attempts to do, to take the vision and work out where some of the development that's envisaged should take place and how it can be integrated with the environmental sensitivities and sustainability. So the strategy was that we worked on and our colleagues from the regional consultancy teams working on governorate spatial strategies, we worked at two levels. We worked at the national level, coming up with a national strategy and a whole series of policies to guide development at the national level, looking at urban growth centres, areas of environmental protection, economic development initiatives, and so on. Now that was then integrated with, at the next tier down, governorate strategies or regional strategies and plans, which responded to the strategic development that was being developed at the national level. At the same time, the national strategy was responding to investigations of the opportunities and constraints for regional development in those different governorates. So there was an iterative process was followed, looking at regional governorate level opportunities and how those could help fulfill the national strategy in Vision 2040. And then there was guidance from the national strategy down to the regional strategies to work out how the national strategy could be put in place. What the strategy didn't do was go down to what we call policy levels 3 and 4, that's structure plans for the major cities, such as Muscat and Savannah, and then local plans for smaller areas within cities and for rural areas. Then there were a number of core themes which were identified, which I think you will have gathered from the points I've been making so far. Sustainability in response to climate change was a core topic that needed to be taken very seriously over the next 20 years. Delivering strategic spatial development, looking at livable, resilient cities and a balance between urban and rural development, whilst maintaining the Omani identity, delivering growth and prosperity, making sure that the economic development opportunities were identified and that spatial development, provision of infrastructure and where housing was going aligned with economic opportunities. Managing the environment in a responsible way, looking after Oman's natural and cultural heritage, that was a core theme. Management of natural resources, agriculture and water resources in particular, also mineral resources, how they could be exploited to the benefit of Oman, but without causing disruption to local communities and the environment. An efficient transport system, looking at moving towards more sustainable modes of transport in the future, both within cities and connecting urban areas as well. And then an efficient infrastructure system. Again, looking at more sustainable ways of generating and distributing electricity, use of solar, and so on. As part of the process, we had to look at the balance of development between smaller settlements and governorate capitals in the 11 governorates of Oman, and development in Muscat as a capital city. Where was the emphasis of development going to go? Was it going to be in Muscat to turn it into a global city with less investment or emphasis on the rural areas? Or was the emphasis going to be on the governorate settlements, or somewhere in between? And at the same time, looking at the possible population projections and the economy and the population, the workforce required to develop Oman at different rates of growth. So I think Simon will pick up on the preferred option, but I think, as you might guess, we didn't go for either extreme. The generally agreed approach to development was that there should be a focus on Muscat and some of the other major cities, but with the governorates also playing a key role, and the governorate capitals contributing to Oman's development with investment taking place in them. So the overall strategy that was developed based on those various key themes that I've mentioned, and consultation with members of the public, the private sector, and other ministries, was to identify, we identified a GDP growth rate of about 3% per annum, and a target by 2040 of 7.1 million people. Economic growth will be driven by logistics, manufacturing, construction, mining, and tourism particularly, plus financial innovative technology in the service sectors. In rural areas, agriculture, fisheries, tourism, and mining would be important. Muscat will be developed as a regional capital city, particularly supporting growth of the knowledge and innovation economy. There will be growth in the national gateway cities of Salalah, Sahar, and Duqm. Nizwa will be a national hub in the interior, and then the various government centres would play their role. Now, in the rural areas, we've developed the concept of special planning zone, a new designation to provide more effective planning and management of development in high quality environments. In the Nejd, we're proposing sustainable, as far as possible, agricultural development there with much better use of water resources. Public transport investment would mostly be in Muscat and within other major urban centres, and also between some of the smaller settlements. And then there would be a big push on renewable energy, solar farms, and onshore and offshore wind farms. We now move on to the sector strategies, and Simon will talk about delivering strategic spatial development.
Thank you very much, Robert. I think we should move along a little bit. So the next slide, please. Okay, when we started the role, obviously there were a number of issues that confronted us. This talk was meant to be, well, one of the titles for this talk was Urban and Rural Planning in Oman, the Forgotten and Neglected Profession. When we started the work, there was very little planning going on, very little strategic planning going on. Some subdivision practices were underway, and development was everywhere. There was no kind of containment and no structure to a lot of the towns, cities, villages that were sprawling around the countryside, and in many cases joining up together. That was one big challenge. There were numerous others. I think I won't go through all these now because we'll get onto them when we go through. So next one, please, Robert.
Yeah.
With regard to, I'll carry on. with regard to urban centre, have you changed the slide?
Yeah,
Robert?
just having a prompt, just a minute. Here we go. Is that it? You got that?
Right, brilliant. So in terms of spatial development, the key target was to improve the urban environment generally and to encourage more compact urban growth. And we kind of had 4 principles that we were looking to follow to try and attain this. One was improving livability and the quality of life of urban places, making sure that standards were put in place and kept, that people had better access to amenities, community facilities, public transport. We also wanted a really high emphasis on the development of vacant land within cities and on brownfield land where that existed, rather than the current practice of developing where vacant land happened to be, wherever it happened to be, much of which was outside the settlements and didn't help to integrate the communities together. We wanted to make sure that we tackled decay and put in place areas that could be developed in a mixed use way so that people could look at it holistically from a social, economic, as well as physical way. And then we wanted to improve areas that were obviously deteriorating quite rapidly through either regeneration, redevelopment initiatives. Next, please. Robert?
Yep, I've done it. Should be there.
So this is where the distance, oh, there we go.
It's just a delay.
Well, the first thing that we tried to do was to put some order, some structure into the settlement and create a settlement hierarchy that didn't really exist there before. This was going to help with the provision of facilities, employment, and we started on the principle of a gateways and hubs type approach, where certain cities were going to be, the investment was going to be higher, and those were obviously Muscat being the capital city, but then also Sohar and Salalah, both of which had big ports and airports, and Whitcombe on the eastern seaboard, which was going to start growing up, hopefully according to the master plan that had been developed for it. So that gave us a kind of basis for development across the country. Obviously, we had to kind of politically, to a degree, make sure that all the governorates were treated equally, and that the governorate centre was also encouraged to grow in terms of providing facilities, employment for the people who lived in that particular governorate. One of the things we found and needed to consider was, as I just said, I mean, a lot of sprawl was taking place and cities were growing out of their boundaries quite quickly. So we decided that some of these national hubs, including Muscat, needed to have more land allocated to them to be able to fulfill their role as economic powerhouses of the country. So we looked at creating Greater Muscat, Greater Salalah, Greater Sohar, and Greater Nizwa. All of these were kind of working together anyway, but it made sense in many cases to start considering them as one entity rather than 2 or 3, as a case in Nizwa, or 2 or 3 or 4 in the case of Greater Muscat. Next, please. I think there's a time lag between. Okay, there we go. So, one of the things that we started doing was we established boundaries around all the settlements within which there was room to grow, but outside of which growth was not permitted unless it was in exceptional circumstances. We wanted to densify and grow towns internally to actually make the density of each city higher than it was at the first, as it was when we found it, and that derelict land, vacant land would be developed instead of the greenfield sites, as we were saying earlier. We also wanted to contain growth and put in measures around towns, and we've got an illustration there of what the UK did in for its green belt policy, which was meant to contain the growth of London. And we are hoping that maybe not the green belt because it's not so easy to grow the trees, but it's a policy that needed to be considered around a lot of the towns, the bigger towns in Oman, to stop them growing outside and taking over the agricultural land, the rural land that was degenerating quite fast as a result of random urban sprawl and urban development. Next, please. We also wanted to bring in a number of other measures that could, again, increase densities. And we call this urban innovation, and wanted to, where feasible, introduce the concept of transit-oriented development. This is obviously dependent upon a transport system, usually buses or trains. And the concept is that you create communities developed around a transport hub so that they're all walkable, they're mixed use, you can have employment, you can have residential, etc., etc. And it's trying to decrease the use of cars, increase the use of public transport. This is a diagram. There's lots of benefits from them where you have the transport system capable of handling it. And in Oman, it's kind of a fine line in some cities. Muscat, we think, could have a light rail system, a bus rapid transit system, and they would then start to have as a nucleus for TOT development. Other cities, it would be more difficult because the size of the cities are not fantastically big, and whereas transit-oriented development helps with bigger cities. Next, please. Robert, thank you. And again, I mean, as every days, they become smart cities. So you start looking at improving growth management, which we're trying to do through various means. We desperately wanted to create or recreate neighborhoods and communities, which were a very integral part of Omani life up until the 1970s, 1980s. But somehow with the urban sprawl and development of these large neighborhoods of 600 square meter plots, that concept was taken down quite considerably in certain places. But it's the concept of smart cities. There's a lot of smart issues that are coming into play at the moment. And we believe a lot of these could be brought into the planning of not only the major cities, but of some of the smaller towns as well. And there is smart living, smart mobility, smart environment are three of the more common ones used, but there's also smart people, smart governance. There's another smart, I can't remember what it is now, but it is. So there's lots of concepts that can be used to try and protect or improve cities, protect cities from new climate change events, etc., etc. And just by thinking smart, hopefully cities will improve the way that they function in the end. Robert, please. So at the moment, community facilities are, it's seemingly fairly random in where they're placed. But with the settlement hierarchy, we're intending to improve knowledge amongst the providers of where and when they should be providing new schools, universities, health centres, etc., etc. Parks and open spaces was something that they were not very good at providing, apart from one or two places where it's excellent. But in general, some of the new housing areas are not so well provided for. And we started saying that you should start looking at providing centres within communities, whether that local, neighbourhood, district centres, where many of these facilities can be provided so that you can share certain facilities. Infrastructure is easier. And we hope that the facilities will be provided correctly in future. All right, please. Obviously, one of the things that really hadn't been or wasn't taken, I was going to say seriously, wasn't integral to the planning of the subdivisions by the ministry that was doing that, was the art of urban design and the way that design needed to be included in all aspects of new development, such that you start improving the neighborhoods that you're trying to plan for. We did produce certain planning standards that we tried to create as part of the project. And we have here 10 kind of very standard issues that we need to incorporate into the development of communities throughout the cities. Next, please. And this is just the next one where we do go through is some of the other types of planning standards that we foresaw being required within urban communities within Oman, in the cities of Oman. They're all there. I think they're things that are kind of becoming more common now, hopefully in planning terms. Next, please. Greening Oman. I mean, there is a lot of green in Oman in many places, but a lot of natural greenery has started to decline. And a lot of cities are becoming warmer and hotter, less green. Sometimes there's a lot of subdivision planning where there are spaces left. And this is not only in Oman, other countries are very similar like this. And the open space, which they're meant to be on those plots, fails to be implemented, at least in the short term. It might over time. There are one or two areas of Muscat that are very good. Some of the older communities in Muscat are very good at provision of public space. But there are many advantages of providing more greenery, especially when temperatures in Oman may well go up considerably in the next 50 plus years. And by ensuring that green spaces, green infrastructure is considered much more as part of every planning project, then that may offset some of the scary temperatures that may well come into places like Muscat in the future. Next, please. Right. Robert mentioned at the beginning there, this new concept of special planning zones. They're not an environmental consideration, they are a new planning designation for Oman. And a lot of the environmental designations in the past saw the protection of the environment as a very static type of proposal, whereby a lot of things were just fenced off so that they were protected. What we're trying to encourage here, because of the amazing amount of natural environment and natural beauty that is in Oman, to actually start creating areas where, similar to the UK and the national parks that the UK has, you can start developing them with a view of everybody being able to do what they like within a park. And here we've got an illustration of the South Downs National Park, just south of London, and the activities that go on in that national park. It's not an area that we want to see sterilized in any way. And you can see that there's lots of people live there. There's lots of farming, there's industries. It actually takes a lot of the kind of cabling that comes over from Europe through it. But what we're trying to say is that these areas, to protect the natural beauty in wherever, I mean, the Dhofar Mountains, the Hajaya Mountains, et cetera, there needs to be some stronger planning controls to ensure that the environment and man can safely live together for the future. We're not trying to stop people enjoying these areas. We think that they are tourist people should be encouraged to go there and look at them and enjoy them. And people should live there and work there. But we just think there should be controls to be set in place to help these places not get any worse through, whether it's through mining, whether it's through infrastructure development, whether it's through sprawl of urban centers. Anyway, thank you. Rural communities, basically, I mean, there's a lot of outward migration from rural communities to the centres of employment like Muscat, Sohar, etc. This work. And what we're trying to propose is that special consideration should go into the development of industries within rural communities, within the rural context, that are appropriate for rural communities to actually get involved with. And we're thinking, there's a range there from tourism, mining if done properly, agriculture, there's a lot of scope to do better agriculture than it's being done at the moment. Fisheries is obviously a subject that is for coastal areas, but it's quite big, etc., etc. And we just want to make sure that more emphasis is put onto establishing more local employment to try and stop some of the commuting that goes on from the rural areas into the urban areas. Next, please. Robert?
Yeah, it's done.
All right. So as well as proposing things that we think should be done, we're also trying to say there's a lot of things that were going on that shouldn't happen. I think there have been a lot of times recently, and in my history with Oman, where I have seen this happen, where everyone knows that certain areas flood. And here you got on the top right-hand corner, you've got, the McDonald's underwater, you've got the shopping centre underwater. And this happens every time it floods in Oman, in Muscat, especially in Muscat anyway. And we know that there were certain, developments that were taking place in wadis. We know that there were certain developments taking place up mountains and things like that. And we don't believe that that practice should continue. We believe, especially in places like Muscat, where there's a lot of mountain cutting, that the mountains should be respected and maintained, and less emphasis should be placed on cutting mountains for the sake of cutting mountains when there is land available elsewhere. So we're feel quite strong that development should not.
Sorry,
not go everywhere. No, it's all right. Don't worry. That's fine. As a summary, we have the network of gateways and hubs. We have a lot of things that we want to control in a nice way, not in a nasty way at all. And we want to establish better communities that are all interconnected as part of urban areas that function properly, that people can be happy to live in, quite frankly. We have some numbers over there that, housing units, for example, we're at 1 million that we believe should be added by the year 2040. The rest of it is fairly standard stuff. And we're hoping for, one of the things you do see there is a base figure of 0 square meters per head for open space. And we want that to see them raised much higher to more. I think it's the UN standard of 9-10 square meters per capita. But I think that's my bit done. So I'm going to pass over quickly to John.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks very much, everybody. And I was working through the growth and prosperity theme. So this is really looking at the economics of the country, how that can change in the future, and then how do we plan for change. The challenges that we had, like many Gulf countries, Oman's still heavily dependent upon oil and gas as the country's generator of foreign exchange, etc. So the diversification agenda was central to what we were doing. It's not something that's new to Oman. It's been going on for many years. Many other initiatives have been taken forward, the Tanfeed initiative, targeting certain sectors. Obviously, the Vision 2040 themes are around diversification as well. So we focus considerably on the manufacturing, logistics, tourism, and business services side of things. But from a functional perspective, we're also considering what makes up an economy. So the small, medium-sized enterprises and how they're brought forward, a movement away from dependence on larger organizations, and making that the economy much more resilient with a stronger small, medium-sized enterprise environment. Historically, there's been some dispersal of economic activities, and we weren't getting the benefits of clustering of activities, the agglomeration benefits that you can get from that. So targeting specific areas and bringing forward clusters of economic activities was high on our agenda. Those economic sectors which had high growth potential, which were looking at technology-based, how tourism could help us, where we could work specifically in financial and business services, were all driving the thought process for change and development of individual economic sectors. Throughout our work, though, one of the key issues was this important balance of the Omani labour force and expatriate labour force, how that could change and develop over time, and how we needed to take that into account. Next slide, please, Robert. So to do this, we started by utilising the Central Bank of Oman's economic model, which one of our sub-consultants, Oxford Economics, prepared for them. It's a fully integrated simulation of the economy, looking at domestic demand, looking at the way in which goods and services are produced and provided in the economy. So some key issues around consideration of productivity and employment and the capital stocks. So how labor intensive we are, how capital intensive we are. We're moving to more capital intensive activities, improving productivity. Oman has had difficulties in maintaining high levels of productivity over time, looking at the best way to move that forward, considering what we import and what we export and how that international trade impacts upon the opportunities that we have. Are there opportunities to substitute some of the imports and development in country? Issues of that were considered as we worked forward and looked at different scenarios for the future, and how GDP growth would be made up of our considerations around these metrics. So this model was extremely important in us for considering the realism that we could put forward for change and growth in the future. This model was also embedded in considerations of international flows of investment. So we were able to give further consideration to the foreign direct investment opportunity that could come to Oman. So a central forecasting tool that was essential for the way we worked on the project. Next slide. Underpinning this, though, was the demographics of the country. We can look at change and growth at the sectoral level, economic sectoral level, but how is that impacted upon by the change in the way in which the communities and the population of the country is made up? Like many countries, Oman is experiencing falling levels of fertility rates. We're finding that Omani ladies are becoming high levels of participation in the workforce, and that will carry on in the future. So the dynamics of the labor force that will be the mainstay of change in the future is changing, and we needed to be able to reflect that in the work that we were doing. So we had quite a complex approach to the way in which demography was considered as part of the work, and work closely with the National Centre for Statistical Information, various other organisations to come forward with population and change scenarios that were realistic of the way in which Oman operates now and will in the future. Next slide. So those metrics helped us consider GDP growth, population, employment change, but then the clustering aspects, and this is where, the most important aspects of the spatial strategies, where is this all going to happen? Simon's alluded to our considerations of the greaters, so Greater Muscat, Greater Sohar, Greater Salalah, Dukkam, these large cosmopolitan cities that are engines for change and growth. So within those, we were looking at particular sectors that could be brought forward. Muscat is sort of knowledge and technology based. Innovation was critical to delivery of different levels of services for different sectors. Advanced manufacturing, logistics, medical health activities, etc., that are emerging from the Greater Muscat environment. Sohar has traditionally had a strong metals, plastics, petrochemicals, logistics cluster, building on that, increasing the supply chain within the local area, making sure we're actually using some of these outcomes to take forward downstream opportunities, and various other approaches to the way in which we look at agglomeration of activities, central business districts, local business districts, trying to bring together physical development in spatial areas that worked for those local environments, a range of innovation and business parks. Oman's got many industrial areas, but not quite so many that are focused purely on business development, linking those with the universities and how those could be brought forward in collaboration, expansion of some of the industrial areas for the domestic market, looking at agricultural hubs. We'd identified a wide range of new opportunities for agricultural development, but we want to be able to add value close to the actual production areas and how we best take those forward. The national tourism strategy had been prepared by the time we were working on the ONSS, so we were able to pull out a considerable amount of extremely good information on tourism clustering and where that would happen in the country, and help to train our work in that way. And underpinning all of our work, there was a quantification process that looked at the amounts of land that would be needed in these areas, and we were able to quantify the land and premises requirements for the future. Next slide, please. Underpinning this, though, was also the way in which we move forward with some of our special designations. Oman, like many countries, is going through a fiscal tightening approach, looking at wide-ranging taxation environment to help the government coffers to be improved. But we still need to have that balance of attracting foreign direct investment, making sure that there are specific areas that works, getting the benefits from free trade zone or special economic zones. So we'd identified a number of additional free zones in Musandam, Kazain, and at Muscat Airport to move that forward. And also, as has been experienced in many other countries, we're looking at urban regeneration and densification and reuse of brownfield sites. So there will be need for special designations to help that process move forward with the abnormal costs associated with the regeneration process. So we targeted and identified a range of urban regeneration areas that could have special designations to enable them to become more attractive for private sector involvement. Next slide, please, Robert. So for each of our main economic sectors in the economy, we set out subsectors that could be brought forward in agriculture, fishing, mining, manufacturing. Energy was a particularly important area in relation to not only the energy transition in the country, moving away from the dependence of actually generating energy from hydrocarbons, but moving that towards renewable energy, but in the same breath, building those industries in the country to do that. So a great sort of win-win of sectoral change. Logistics long been an important part of the economy as a whole, but drawing out further opportunities around those clustering ideas that I just briefly talked about before. So for each of these sectors, there were subsectors, there were targets set, there was identification of particular activities that would be important within them that enabled us to come to conclusions on the rate of change and growth for the economy as a whole. Next slide, please, Robert. And that left us with these high-level summaries in terms of, as Simon said, the gateways and hubs. It obviously moves through the concept of community development where people live, work, play, etc. So as you would expect, the economic activities would be involved in those spatial areas as well. And we looked at how we could move through the quantification process with our GDP growth, a range of potential activities. I think here one of the main concepts about the economy is, as we've seen over the last few years, there are external shocks to the economy that can be difficult to predict, but the spatial strategy itself is a framework. It's dependent upon monitoring and evaluation. It can be adapted as it moves forward. It's a process that enables us to consider the amount of change and activity that's occurred in short, medium, and long terms. And you can finesse at where you are at any stage within the spatial strategy to link you with the way in which the economy is changing as a whole. I think in the interest of time, I'll leave it there. And Robert, you would like to take us through the environment side?
Yeah. Right, thanks very much, John. I will move on quickly because we are over time slightly. One of the important sectors, as we've called it, is the natural and cultural environment. We've talked about spatial development and the economy, but I just want to introduce this with a reminder that Oman does have world-class landscapes and seascapes. I think, for those living there, and brought up there, it's perhaps taken a little bit for granted what fantastic landscapes, mountains, wadis, coasts that do exist in the Sultanate. So when people come from outside, they are quite mind-blowing in many ways. Dramatic escarpments, amazing cliffs and coasts, associated with it some wildlife both in the land and the sea, and even in Muscat there is a remarkable setting for a capital city on the coast with dramatic mountains behind it. And those sitting in Matra at the moment, I hope appreciate that. At the same time, there's also amazing geology. It's brought Oman's recent wealth. But I think those who studied the geology, you can see the mountains. It has got some remarkable, unique features that many people would like to come and see. And then, in addition to that, Oman has a very long history. And as I'll go on to mention, so there's some World Heritage sites. There's some remarkable buildings and signs, the Falaj of that man's relationship to the environment and how he's managed to live here. And this is just Jebel Akhdar, the Hadjar Mountains, for example. These are scenes from the Hadjar Mountains. I should thank my colleagues in the now Ministry of Housing and Urban Planning who put that slide together of some of the remarkable features that can be seen in the mountains of Oman in the north. In addition, I say in the process of preparing the national strategy and identifying environmental sensitivities and areas which should be conserved or managed as well in a better way, along with development, we gathered data, some original, some a collation of studies done by others on this is the flora and fauna. So which are the areas where most reptiles are found, the lizards and geckos in Oman, which are the areas important for plants. On the right is which are the areas of geological significance, which could be potential geoparks. On the plant side, there are a number of plants completely unique to Oman, a few unique to the region. Oman has the responsibility to look after some of these. They could have future medicinal uses. They're used by people for medicines or now and in the past. They can make honey, they're fodder for livestock and so on. So there's important plant areas in Oman which we identified and took into account in the development of the spatial strategy. Similarly, there's birds. That's quite a diversity of bird life, both resident birds and birds migrating through. These are all part of Oman's biodiversity, and along with the planet's climate, the planet's biodiversity is under threat. So there is the Convention on climate change, which people are most familiar with, but there is also a convention on biodiversity conservation, to which Oman is a signatory and has some obligations. So in the strategy, we looked at how that might be accomplished. I mentioned heritage. Oman has remarkable cultural heritage, and this is diverse. It's different in the regions. If you go to the coast and places like Sahar, there's the maritime heritage. You've got the forts and castles in the mountains. You've got the Aflaj, which UNESCO have recognized as a World Heritage Site. And then down in Dhofar, you have the Frankincense Trail. So starting on the coast, the town of Balid, and going to Shisar, and then into the deserts, and it's the land of frankincense. So Oman has a remarkable heritage which needs to be protected for its own in its own right, but also it is a resource for tourism. Tourists these days, if you see a UNESCO World Heritage Site in a country, that's often that's a must-do, must-see place. So World Heritage Sites are very much to be valued, and Oman has 5 already and has some others on the tentative list. There are also within some of the original towns, particularly noticeable in places like Nizwa, Bahala, Rastak. They're the old urban quarters, which it's recognized should be looked after and incorporated within the modern development as cultural conservation areas. This can include buildings with historic connotations, forts and castles, the souks, and then clusters of buildings where people used to live, the old hara, as they're called. And some of these are now being developed very nicely in Nizwa, for an example. So there's cultural conservation areas. There's what we call cultural landscapes. China has its Great Wall, but Oman has its terraced mountains in Jabal Akhdar, and it has its Faraj. So man has had some impact on the environment over time, on the landscape, but it can be a very positive impact, where irrigation is brought into the mountains, date palms are grown, roses, pomegranates, and so on. So there's great potential here for and a need to manage those landscapes in a special way. So we recognize this is the sector challenges which the national strategy and the regional strategies have tried to address, is designating areas and an associated program for Oman to conserve its natural assets. And in the Biodiversity Convention, United Nations one, there were targets to meet by 2020, which was 17% of terrestrial ecosystems and inland waters to be protected by 2020 and 10% of marine coastal areas. Unfortunately, Oman, along with nearly every other country, did not manage to meet that target. It's only got 4 or 5% of its areas conserved for biodiversity at the moment. So we recognize there is a need for stricter conservation protection in some areas, but as Simon was talking about, and I'll mention a bit further, there is a need to protect the higher quality locations in terms of landscape, and to control and integrate better the other uses. And this is where we've designated this or developed this concept of special planning zones, which the Ministry of Housing and Urban Planning is trying to take forward at the moment, where a much better planning and enforcement system is required, not to prevent development, but to make sure it takes place in the right place and to the right scale, without damaging landscape or more sensitive environment. And the same applies to the coast. There's some dramatic coastlines, and we have proposed special planning zones for the coastal areas as well. And these special planning zones embrace as well some of the best cultural assets that Oman has, and these are particularly found in and near the mountains. So go on, and for those that speak Arabic, this is, I should thank again my colleague Aisha Al-Wahabi, who I don't think could be here tonight, and others in the Ministry of Housing and Urban Planning, who have defined special planning zones in Arabic. They define how the areas are special, and therefore special planning is required. But the Ministry of Housing can give you some advice on that if you have further questions. And so the target is, by 2040, to have 5 special planning zones established in the Hajar Mountains, in the Sharqiya Sands, in Al-Wusta, in the Hukuf area, and on the Jeddah, and then in Dhofar, where you have the very dramatic monsoon-affected mountains, which are completely unique to Arabia. All of these can be given a conservation category, which will help Oman meet some of its targets, which I say by 2020, people were talking about 17%. Now the latest targets are likely to be 30% by 2030. So just wrapping up, just on some of the core environmental themes, I think the strategy seeks to ensure the environment in general and areas of high environmental cultural significance in particular are used wisely and proactively managed and enhanced for the benefit of existing and future generations. So nature conservation areas are proposed where stricter conservation and education can take place. These typically fall within the special planning zones, which are there particularly to protect the high value landscapes and some of the cultural conservation areas. Coastal zone management areas zones are proposed. There are also proposals to develop Oman's blue economy, its offshore resources through a marine spatial plan, and also to improve generally the monitoring, reporting on the state of environment in Oman. And so we proposed that the target for special planning zones and conservation areas should be about 25% of Oman under those designations, which is not to say that these are areas where no development should take place. It's just getting the better balance between development and environment. And I think on that note, I will say thank you very much. We have overshot a little bit with time, but we would be very happy to take some of your questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Robert, Mr. John, and Mr. Simon for the very informative and comprehensive discussion and presentation. If I may just stop sharing, and dear guests, we are ready to receive your questions either in the chat or by raising hand option. Thank you very much. Yeah, please, Mrs. Monica, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that was incredibly helpful for us, particularly the structure WorldClass team. Obviously, it's depth of knowledge and information. So thank you very much for that. Looks all very logical and informative and really interesting. I wanted to ask you a couple questions, actually. First of the questions, which was kind of a little bit of our mind when we were reviewing it, what is the current status of ONSS? Because what we observed is we getting the information through the ministry, who is our client. We yet still to obtain the entire document. We have looked at the shared the executive summary. But you know, was there ever in a program or project anticipated project website when it's a public access? Is this document public or not?
Monica, you need to speak to your client about that.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. Okay, that was, you shut me quickly down there. I didn't know there was a sensitive question. We have found this also with our project in Luanda, that project has completed and everybody using it, but it's not necessarily at the public domain. But we will do check with our client. Also, I wanted to find if you had any further information or further thoughts or studies, observations about the thing we're finding as we're finding our feet with this project, which was information about how did you dealt with all the land being the so-called gifted or assigned land, because that we're finding it's a bit of a interesting topic to put our hands on. Did you have any observation on that particular land type? Thank you.
I think that's one for Simon.
Well, it is, but I mean, and it's a never-ending piece of string, really. One of the reasons I think there is so much sprawl in the country and so many poor urban areas in the country is because of that great gift that was given to the Omani people. But in terms of urban development, it's a really difficult one to handle. And I think various people have looked at it. We looked at it and were asked to not look at it too hard because it was a very sensitive issue.
Yeah.
And although we and your client has thoughts, it doesn't necessarily mean that those thoughts are going to be enacted anytime soon. I mean, it is socially extremely sensitive.
Yeah.
And the best thing is to, I don't know, ride with it at the moment. Right?
Yeah, I think that's where we're getting to already. Yeah. Yeah, I think
you've got to talk, it's something you've got to talk to your client about, and how they wish you to handle it, I would have thought, is the best approach. It is an issue. They know it's an issue. Every single one of them in the ministry, I would imagine, knows it's some kind of issue. And to me, it's something that the collective government, parliament, have to consider how they handle these things in the future.
Yeah, I mean,
it doesn't help anyone in the short term.
Yeah, we've kind of came to the same conclusions already, and this is week 3 on the project. But what I think is going to be quite interesting, how you map it. It's not. One thing is what you do with it, but when you map it, it's a quite extensive. Yeah, it's the elephant in the room for sure. But yeah, thank you. I suspect that will be the answer. But thank you.
I would like to add something to what Simon was saying, is that part of it was the institutional assessment that we were doing to review this land allocation system. And there were actually some stuff that we were discussing at the level of the Supreme Council for Planning at that time that I don't know how far it went so far. So yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Mahmoud. Thank you very much. Any more questions, please?
Hello. Could I ask a question, please?
Yes, Mr. Phil, please go on.
Okay. Interested to know a little bit about the carbon footprint of the average Omani is quite high. How had you taken that factor into account?
That's a difficult one. We did have a general, I cannot remember off the top of my head what the average carbon footprint energy consumption was, or if we even worked it out. I think one of the things that we identified, if one can call it under the environmental sector, was actually the lack of readily available information on such topics. The Ministry of Environment had produced a national strategy for climate change, which I think was approved by government towards the end of the project, and we tried to factor that in. I think I would have to talk to you offline about that, or you would need to talk to which is now the authority dealing, I think, with that kind of thing, which is the I'm trying to remember what it's the
environmental authority.
With the environmental authority, but climate change was assigned to, under recent reorganization, to the organization under I think the Ministry of Energy.
Yeah, I mean, it is the Civil Aviation Authority, which is right now actually under the structure of the Ministry of Transport.
Yes, I mean, I was thinking about systematic changes that you'd make to sort of reduce dependency on the car is an obvious one. District cooling might be another strand that you would have looked at nationally. You know, things of that sort. Even the materiality of building construction.
Yes, one of the things we have promoted was a review of building standards, and I think that was in the process of being taken forward. I'm not sure, but developing things like Estidama, as in the UAE, so that buildings are more efficient. I think there are a number of buildings now trying to get LEED certification in Oman. But again, those are details some of which are available in the strategy reports, and I can't, you know, we need to go to one of our climate change specialists on that.
Yeah, we were in fact in the process back in the end of 2019 to actually start something called the Oman Green Building Strategy, and we were and then we did even almost sign an agreement with BMI, the British organization. And yeah, I mean, we were in fact about to start that when some, you know, economic type of constraints hit the project from moving forward. But I am not sure of where is it right now, and then what is the status of it since I left the government.
Okay. Anyway, very helpful. Thanks everyone for that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Phil. Mr. Mohammed Israeli, تفضل. You may unmute, please, Mr. Mohammed.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon all. I have a couple of questions basically to the team. First of all, thank you very much for all of this great work. I've gone through the strategy at some stage and it's an excellent piece of work that try to integrate all the different ongoing activities across different sectors. So thank you very much. My question is really around you know, what does the execution plan or implementation plan looks like? How we define a set of projects with a set of timelines so that we can, you know, move the strategy from, let's say, from a strategy into you know, a kind of action plan or a specific projects to achieve whatever targets or KPIs that we have planned for. So this is one. The second point, really, how we are integrating the strategy with other ongoing strategies across different sectors, industrial strategies, basically oil and gas ongoing activities, the new emerging set of energies, hydrogen, renewables, and so on and so forth. And we know that some of these development activities are progressing very fast, faster basically than you know, the execution plan of the spatial strategy. And the third point really is around how we are, let's say, or what measures we have put in place to adapt to climate change risks. You know, it's very clear that you know, we are expecting sea level rise. We are expecting more extreme floods, basically more extreme rainfalls, and so on. And we know that so many developments, had taken place and still taking place in low-lying areas and high-risk areas. So, what urgent measures have we taken really to stop such, I would call it, unplanned or irrational developments happening in this high-risk areas? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mohammed. In terms of the implementation, yeah, there was a full suite of projects that were identified, phased over time, that were part of the 13th five-year development plan, and those are being taken forward. There may be some phasing issues that are going on at the moment that require changes to the way in which they're delivered, given the availability of funding. Integration with other strategies. Obviously, we work closely with all the ministries when we were developing this project, and the Ministry of Housing continues to integrate and work closely with the other ministries as they move forward in the implementation of the ONSS and the RSSs. Climate change, Robert, you'd like to say something? But obviously, we've got a full suite of climate change tools that have been prepared as part of the project.
Exactly. I think I think we recognise that climate change is a serious issue, and both adaptation and mitigation were required. So there's policies and projects within the suite of projects that John has mentioned to take forward some of the initiatives to deal with that, but it will take time to roll them out, and I think that's with the Ministry of Housing and the other institutions that we hope will be taking forward the national strategy over the next 5, 10, 20 years. It's not expected that they will all be implemented immediately. It is a long-term strategy for the Ministry of Housing and the other institutions to sort of read and understand and take forward over time.
Yeah. And I would like to just add a little that I was the link between the ONSS and the 5-year development plan. So what I was doing, I was trying to to put that compatibility metrics in between the ONSS project performance that we have put forward, and then the kind of the budget allocated for the next 5-year development, given some type of prioritization that we have put forward based on the budget available, and then based on the dual shock on the Oman economy, which we have been experiencing till now. And what we mean by the dual shock is basically the lower oil prices before, which is right now changing, as well as the pandemic.
I think on that, I say there are policies covering this, and how to deal with change as it takes place. Keeping the plan under review, modifying it as appropriate. So the intention was that it's an integrated project looking at economics, environment, spatial planning, putting these things together for the first time in Oman, and that does provide a means of taking forward the Vision 2040. But as but as John, Simon, and myself, we completed our input to that some months or over a year ago. So we're sharing our experience in preparing it, and some of the highlights, some of the key themes which we worked on. So I think, I don't know, unless there's any other questions, whether we should.
Yeah, we have 2 more questions. Mr. Mohammed Al-Riyami, and following by Mrs. Shahla Hussain. Mr. Mohammed, please go ahead.
Yeah, my question is about building capability and capacity within the strategy. As you know, in order for a strategy to be sustainable, you need people behind it. And you need to build the local capability and capacity at the different levels. So is there any consideration in that aspect?
John wants to answer that, but yes, there was capacity building.
Yes, Mohammed, there was a capacity building program that was identified at national and at regional governorate level for planning perspective, and that's a process that the Ministry of Housing has continued to look at implementing.
And as an example, and it's a very small one, we have got, we've on an individual basis with the ministry, we've arranged for some work experience visits to UK national parks to understand a little bit better how planning takes place in those, the sort of technical collaboration between the UK national parks and the Omani Ministry of Housing and Urban Planning. So these issues have been identified, and I believe capacity building is included within some of the projects of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Planning.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Shahla Hussain.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the nice presentation on the ONSS. It was a very interesting topic to get to know more about. So I'm from Oman Think Urban, and we actually deal with community engagement and try to engage with various like community groups on the ground. And one interesting topic that I just wanted to understand from the ONSS projects as well is that if you're able to cover these sort of very complex overlaps between community, cultural practices, environmental management, in like infrastructure, urban governance, planning, because when you talk to the residents, they had a very keen sense of what are the dam projects, for instance, coming up on the Wadi channels that are flowing through, their own settlements, and how the various residents groups or Majlis, along with the sheikhs and the Rashids, were involved in such conversations with the government. So in these sorts of projects, are these very complex overlaps ever considered or documented in some way, and how are they being responded to?
I think in the presentation that was given by Simon, we did emphasize, and I think Vision 2040 does this as well, greater involvement of communities and more devolved power to governorates over time. But I think once you get, I think we were working at the national level and there was quite a lot of engagement at that. I think the plans you're talking about are more at the local. I did mention the 4-tier level of planning, national, regional, structural, and local. I think what you're talking about is local. In principle, that was encouraged by the strategy.
Okay, because they also seem to have a lot of involvement with these more strategic decisions, for dams, for instance, that seemed a lot more, it was not only affecting their own lives and engagements, but it was actually going to affect the larger Wadi streams itself. So yeah, but I totally understand that it's at various levels, and maybe this sort of engagement would be more relevant for the local level planning. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Engineer Azhar Al-Qaisi.
Assalamu alaikum jami'an. Thank you for this nice presentation. I have a couple of questions. My first question is, from your opinion, what is the kind of transportation modes, either in the capital or between cities or with the GCC states, that will enhance the ONSS? This is the first. The second question, I found that the ports, Salalah, Duqm, and Sohar is very important position that will enhance also the diversity of the Oman economy. So I didn't find too much emphasis on this point, especially for logistic services, and we are looking for to diverse the income instead of oil And I found that these 3 ports will bring and enhance and enforce the income for Oman in the future, nowadays or in the future. Thank you.
Thanks. I think in terms of the transport in the cities and the modal shift opportunities, we'd identified a range of potential metro or light rapid transit opportunities, particularly in Muscat. Bus rapid transit systems, feeder systems for buses, etc. Full range of public transport networks, both national, international, so inter as well as inner city opportunities. So a significant amount of public transport enhancement was seen as important in delivering the transport solution. And a commuter railway line along the Batana coast was also defined as part of the outcomes of the work, and we were also able to look at some segmented construction of the GCC rail network, though obviously that seems now to be an opportunity that may be much longer term in the future, given the current level of integration of neighbouring countries. In terms of the ports, yep, they were central. Salalah, Duqm and Sohar are central to our spatial strategy. Those are the main cosmopolitan cities. Those are the cities that we're looking to build on, and the ports serving those cities are absolutely integral to the delivery of diversification in both logistics, but also in the free zone export orientated product development in those areas, as well as bringing new opportunities for domestic market development of product as well. So the central theme around logistics is very much tying into those ports, linking the ports to the airports as well, given that, you know, we have airports at Sohar, Salalah and Duqm. So looking at that multi-logistic kind of offering to develop the economy as a whole. So they are central to the delivery of economic diversification in the country.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Engineer Azhar. Any more questions before we end our session today?
Actually, I had a quick question about the housing demand. I remember there was the number was something like 1 million units. I think that's over the span. I'm guessing that's not nationwide and over the span of the entire strategy, correct? Not on an annual basis. Yeah. Okay. And did you look at the housing demand by type of housing, by type of dwelling? So villas versus apartments versus anything like that. Is that broken down anywhere?
It is broken down, but you'd have to go to the ministry and talk to them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, it is actually part of the non-spatial data, a part of the blueprint shared. It's just a matter of navigation, I guess.
Cool. Excellent.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think we don't have more questions. If we might just give our guest a final word before we close the session. Dr. Robert, Mr. Simon, Mr. John, over to you, please.
Well, thank you very much for listening to our presentation and for your questions and interest in the strategy. You know, we wish those taking it forward well. It sets a good framework, as John has said, for spatial development. It was intended to try and achieve a sensible balance between urban and rural development of the Sultanate. And I say, recognizing that from my perspective, Oman's environment, its landscapes are world-class and should be cherished and incorporated into your development plans. So thank you.
Yes, thanks all for participation, and we're open to other questions if you want to take anything offline. So thanks again.
Yes, I can't repeat anything the others have said. So thank you very much for this evening, and see you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you, dear guests. We have reached to the end of our session today. Thank you, Dr. Robert, Mr. John, and Mr. Simon, for the very informative and interesting session. And thank you all for participating with us. Good night. Thank you very much.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you
so much, and Dr. Robert. Thank you so much, Simon and John. And you guys are always the best.
Thank you, Mr. Mahmoud.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, Mahmoud. Take care.
I'll see you guys soon, inshallah.